There's something about this current moment. There's something about this current moment where our imaginations have been arrested, where folks seem to want to insist that our only options, politically, existentially, are those right in front of us. And part of the work of tilling the soil, of opening up possibility, is creating the conditions under which we can see beyond the now. That's how I define the prophetic. Right? Creating the conditions where we can see beyond the opacity of our current circumstances. And I learned that actually coming out of the tradition of those of us who are the inheritors of the legacy of slavery. How did these people, under those conditions, imagine tomorrow, given the darkness of now? And so, Emerson, singing America, Whitman answering, this grand tradition of democratic letters. And yet we find ourselves in a moment where greed, selfishness, ugliness, evil dominates. And this is particularly so for Black America.
Get some. Y'all in the winning circle, shot some squares though. You in the killing fields, ignoring the scarecrows. Yeah, ho, I'm Benny Blanco in the last scene, making the power play high off for caffeine. This is a tag team, fantasy the bad dream. The male version of Carrie killing the class queen. Bati bloggers quit dodging my emails. Take that whack shit off, the real prevail.
Welcome to Free Lunch Podcast, home of the New South Movement and the New South Movement Network. We got the main man with us, BG. BG, how you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing good, man. Taking a break from my real job to come do my fun job.
Yeah,
so how good and how pleasant it is.
Yeah, it is, man. And on today, we actually have intellect, man. We finna have class today, and I think with our special guest, he's really going to be able to share a lot with us. Really around his new book that I'm going to tell everybody about here in a minute. But I'm excited.
Yeah, we're stepping it up, man, and we try to raise the level of this show by enlightening people, raising people's consciousness to different ideas and thoughts. And we hope that we deliver once again on this Free Lunch Podcast.
We do. So we do have a hard stop. So let's get right into it.
Let's get to it.
Yeah, we have Professor Eddie Glaude, who's born in Moss Point, Mississippi. He is the chair of the Center for African American Studies and the William S. Starr Professor of Religion and African American Studies at Princeton. Glaude is a 1989 graduate of Morehouse College, where he was the student government president, holds a master's degree in African American Studies from Temple University, and a master's degree in religion from Princeton University, as I mentioned earlier. In religion from Princeton University, is the founding member and senior fellow of the Jamestown Project. Noted scholar, Glaude began his teacher career at Bowdoin College, where he served as the chair of the Department of Religion. And we really want to talk about his new book, right? So his new book,
Democracy in Black, How Race Still Enslaves the American Soul.
Okay, how you doing, Professor? We got born on the Gulf Coast, well, raised on the Gulf Coast. Were you born on in Moss
Point,
Point, Mississippi?
Raised. I'm Mississippi stock, man. Moss Point, Mississippi. Yeah, absolutely. Born and raised.
That's close to you, ain't it, Tight? That's right down the road from Mobile.
It's right down the road, and we're gonna talk about
that. I got
that.
family in Mobile, Doc.
Oh, wow.
And see, this is the type of person we wanted on this show. When we started this movement, Professor, the New South Movement Network, where we wanted to really embark on the Southern experience, Southern culture, and use this platform not only to highlight some of our very own, but also use it to provide a Southern personality. Because if you really look at it, it's really dominated by East and West Coast personalities and medias. So we need to figure out how we can promote that Southern culture. So you, when we started this, ideally, you're the type of person we wanted on this show.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really appreciate it. I'm Southern to the core, and so this is, a little stank on you. You know what I mean? So this is great. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
We are. Yes. So I know we got a hard stop. So we really wanted to, our audience likes to hear that understanding and really hear about where you come from and how you went from, Moss Point, to Morehouse and then to Princeton, where you currently, are employed. Right. And so I know that's a lot and we really can't cover all of that because we do want to talk about your book, and really touch on three things in the book where, the value gap, black political class and the blank out campaign, which I think all three are relevant. But for the next 10 or 15 minutes or so, can we really talk about your experiences in Moss Point, Mississippi, growing up in Moss Point and how you ended up at Morehouse? And
absolutely. I grew up in a working class family. My dad worked at the post office, although that was high cotton back in the day. Yeah. That's middle class life right there. Yeah. So my dad worked at the post office, but my mom, she worked at Ingalls Shipbuilding, at Ingalls Shipyard.
And you know what? My dad works at Ingalls today. He's been there for over 25 years.
Yeah, so she retired from Ingalls, and she used to work the cleaning detail. And then she became a supervisor of the cleaning detail. And it was because of, in some ways, my dad's insistence on us, not being knuckleheads. He understood he had some precocious kids. So when he got hired, he was the second African American hired at the post office in Pascagoula, Mississippi. And when he got hired in the post office, he moved us from one side of town to the other, the east side to the west side. So he moved us across the tracks.
Know what that means?
You know what that means. So we moved into this nice neighborhood up on a hill called Briarwood. And, I was able to go to different schools. I was able to interact, with, these white kids in ways that my brother didn't. I remember our first time, I talk about this in the book, right? When we first moved, I'm playing with my Tonka truck right outside the house. And, the new neighbor, and the white neighbor comes out, his parents comes out and he yells, "Stop playing with that nigga." And that was the first time I had been called that word. And so I ran into my house and I told my dad, and my dad is a unique black man, right? So he doesn't, how can I put this? He doesn't suffer white people easily. So he ran outside, and I don't know what he did to those folks, but they moved out of the neighborhood not too long after. And the neighbors in the backyard shot out the back window with a pellet gun. My dad responded with a 12 gauge shotgun and blew out a limb off the tree, said, "Shoot back here again." So it was that kind of environment, right? Where he instilled in us, and my mother instilled in us this sense of pride, even though we were living under hostile conditions at times. And he insisted, he didn't talk much. We have a very complex relationship, but every time report card day came, he had us line up right outside the living room, and he would sit on the couch and we'd have to walk in one by one. And he would look at the report card and he said, "Now what's this doing here? Why is this here?" Or I remember in the 4th grade, my teacher, Miss Davis, was really hounding me because I was always in advanced classes. And, I just jumped up and yelled that she was a racist, and I walked out. Wow. And I thought my dad was going to kill me, right? Because you just don't get up and walk out of class, right? No matter what. And then, he just came up to me. So when I got home and I told him what happened, he said, "What did she say?" And I said, "She said X, Y, and Z." And he said, "Every time somebody says something to you like that, you stand up for yourself." So from that early age, there was this environment of being an advocate for yourself, trusting yourself, reaching for excellence, holding yourself accountable, and pushing the boundaries. Now, he did it in a crazy way, right? He did it in a crazy way, but I had my mama and my great grandmama, who made the best pinto beans on the planet, with some whole cake brick, man, and some sorghum syrup, bro. Come on.
I'm following you.
It was beautiful. It was beautiful. So, and then from there, my sister, who graduated valedictorian of our high school, went to Spelman, because we had a Spelman woman at Moss Point High School. And, she came back from school and she said, "You too white." Cause, I was in all these elite classes, and she said, "You act too white. You need to take a look at Morehouse." And I said, "All right, well, let me take a look at Morehouse." And I wound up applying for a summer program, and I decided I didn't want to go back home. So I just jumped out my junior year. I went to college, and I ain't been looking back since.
How was that Morehouse experience?
Bruh, it's, how can I put it? Morehouse during those days were just, it was just popping on every level. I always say I was educated at Morehouse. I was trained at Princeton, but educated at Morehouse. It was there that I got a sense of, myself, right? I mean, I learned, it reinforced something that my dad taught me, right? That wherever I am, I'm supposed to be.
Right.
That I can think with the best of them, right? My closest partners I made at Morehouse. Friends I still have to this day. I don't need any more new friends, right? I made my closest partners I met while at Morehouse. My sense of intellectual curiosity was cultivated there. And one thing I never had to worry about was whether or not I was there as an affirmative action baby, right? So I'm an HBCU product. Only thing I had to worry about is I didn't have no money, right? I was broke. And Morehouse is, man, that's black bourgeoisie, bro. There's some rich black people in there. Yeah. I didn't have anything. So, but it was an amazing experience, from Dr. Parker to Dr. Barksdale, to Dr. Gloria Wade Gales. I mean, man, I still want to give a shout out to, Sterling Hudson. He was the dean of admissions, and I walked into his office at the age of 16, and I sat down and I said, I want to convince you to admit me to Morehouse right now. And I walked out of that office for the scholarship. Oh, wow. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be where I am now.
Doc, what was your pitch, though? How can you pitch getting a scholarship at 16?
Bro, I was a boss, man.
What was the pitch?
No, I was just trying to letting him know of, what I was capable of, what I had done in Mississippi. And in Mississippi, I was elected the first black youth governor. You remember those YMCA youth legislature programs they would have across the South?
Right.
I do.
In Mississippi, man, I was elected the black youth governor.
So was that Boyd State? Was that Mississippi Boyd State?
Mississippi Boyd State, I was also, involved in that. But this is the YMCA youth legislature with Tony Lay and all those folks, bro.
Okay.
It was amazing. It was an amazing experience. And so I just laid out, what I had done. The school that I had come from, because Moss Point is predominantly black. It's the labor force of Pascagoula. Right. And its school system has always been, at the bottom half of schools in Mississippi. And Mississippi has the worst public schools in the country. So what I was able to do and achieve in Moss Point High School, and just say, look, Dr. King has come through here on the early admission program. Maynard Jackson's come through here. Early admission program. And I told him I'm going to be just like those brothers.
You did your homework.
Exactly. And walked out of there with a scholarship. And I called my mom, said, Moms, I'm not coming home. I got a scholarship. And she said, you're going to come home. And then, I came home and told them what happened. And they put me on the bus with a powder blue suitcase, a Greyhound bus. And I made my way to Atlanta. That's how I got there.
Let me ask you a question around, majors. Did you know what you wanted to study going to Morehouse, or was that something that kind of evolved throughout your experiences on the campus?
Well, I thought I was going to be a politician, right? So, I had been involved in politics at the state of Mississippi for a long time. I remember being a special guest of the Mississippi Democratic Party to the 1984 Democratic Convention in San Francisco. I was there when I saw Jesse deliver that extraordinary speech in 84. Mario Cuomo's Tale of Two Cities. I was there when black folk booed Coretta Scott King, because the black leadership class was trying to undermine Jesse at that time. And I was just 15 years old at the time. It was an amazing experience. So I thought I was going to be a politician. I was going to go to law school and then go back to Mississippi and run for office. But I took my first constitutional law class with Abe Davis, the first PhD in constitutional law, at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I briefed my first case, and I was bored out my damn mind. Yeah. I was like, I can't do this.
Right.
So I was reading novels and stuff. My closest partner, who now teaches at Harvard Law School, took the same course with me that year. And now he's a professor of law at Harvard Law. He loves the law. I fell out of it. So then what happened is that I took a class with Dr. Aaron Parker, and I said, I want to do that. He was my philosophy teacher. And I just wanted to be like him. And so I wound up majoring in political science, focusing in political theory, and minoring in philosophy and religion.
So at Morehouse, you had a fantastic experience. You was a student, SGA president.
They tried to kick me out 3 times, Doc.
What were you doing?
Well, as president of the Student Government Association, we wanted to transform the experience of students on campus. And so we thought that, we didn't need to be thankful for being at Morehouse. We needed to be educated, and we wanted Morehouse to treat us better. So we thought, back in those days, it could be it could be August, man, 90 degrees in Atlanta, and we couldn't go to the registrar's office in shorts. They would make us change clothes, or we would go into the cafeteria, and the food, bruh, it was just terrible. Or we couldn't mail our mail on campus. We had or register, it took us 2 weeks to register for classes, right? So we said this was unacceptable. So we just kind of mobilized and organized and did it in an imaginative way. The second and third time was, I helped co-found an Afrocentric fraternity at Morehouse called Kemet Asen. And so it was an Afrocentric fraternity, and they tried to get us to cease and desist and threaten to kick us out of school. And then when I was SGA president, they said they were going to pay my room and board, and then they refused to do it. So the students started raising money for me, and then they demanded that I give them the money. And I was like, man, I'm not giving y'all any money. And so they threatened to throw me out. So those were those precocious days, man. Those were those precocious days.
BG,
see, you got all this Southern coming out of me now.
That's all right. That's what we want.
That's what we want. But BG, he got me thinking about that. It kind of reminded me of that 4th grade story that he just told me when he walked out of classroom. I mean, this has been in you since we can remember that fight and that not taking whatever you consider to be unjust, standing on your
firm.
I tell my students all the time, in college, you're gonna cultivate the habits of courage, or you're gonna cultivate the habits of cowardliness, one or the other. And so when we decided to call for the resignation of the vice president of student affairs and the registrar at the time, I was walking up the steps in King's Chapel about to give this speech. And I stopped and I said, Lord, I don't have a high school degree, because I just got my high school degree like 4 years ago. Oh. And I had a PhD, right? Because they just listed me as a dropout. And I'm walking up the steps and I'm like, wow, man, if they kick me out, I don't have a high school degree. What am I going to do? And I said to myself, you can just join the service like your brother. Go on and make this speech. And I just walked up the steps. So, right? In those moments, right? Uh-huh. You cultivate courage or you cultivate cowardliness, right? So I am who I am because of that experience at Morehouse.
But you said you didn't have a high school degree. So you literally just left in junior high and went straight, and Morehouse accepted you
yeah, right after my junior year. So I didn't finish high school. No.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know they could do that. Were you aware of that?
Well, they had a program. Remember during the World War II, they had a program because so many people were going off to fight the war that they created what they call an early admissions program. And Dr. King was part of this program. So he went to school at 15. So was Maynard Jackson. He did as well.
Gotcha.
So this is a special program at Morehouse.
Right before we get into the book, I did want to kind of touch on your journey from Morehouse to Princeton, and really discuss how you were involved with the State of the Black Union at that one point, because that's kind of when I got introduced to you. And you kind of stepped on the scene to me, because you were in a lot of instances, you were the youngest person on that stage.
Yeah, one of the youngest ones. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you were one of the youngest on the stage. So, and some of the things you were saying were profound. So
at Morehouse, I kind of had a conversion experience. I became this Black nationalist, found a language that could explain my father's rage. Yeah. And so I wound up going to Temple to get my master's degree in African American studies, studying with Malefi Asante. But even when I was at Morehouse with this nationalist thing, I was still reading widely, still thinking. I wasn't allowing the ideology to box me in. So when I got to graduate school at Temple, I didn't feel fulfilled intellectually. Mm-hmm. So I was at this conference at the University of Wisconsin-Madison with Asante and Skip Gates, and I delivered this paper, and Cornel West was in the audience. Mm-hmm. And he heard me deliver the paper. And so then we hooked up, and he asked me to come study with him at Princeton. So Corn is like one of my closest partners.
Yeah.
And so it was through Cornell that I met Tavis. So Cornell and Tavis and Mike Dyson were doing their thing. And then, they fell out for a variety of reasons. And so Corn was like, come with me to the State of the Union. So I was behind the scenes watching stuff and looking, behind the curtain, looking at how things were moving and then giving advice. And then so finally Tavis said, man, come on in here and do this thing with us. And so that's how I got put on with the State of the Black Union through Cornell. And then, we started doing this stuff with the Covenant with Black America, then the Covenant in Action. And, and then when you're behind the curtain, you see how people operate. And, whatever it is, this is what I love about this show. Whatever it is, wherever I am and whatever I am doing and wherever I am, I'm still Juanita's child. Right. I'm still my mama's baby.
Yeah.
So my ethics are really rooted in Moss Point, Mississippi, and my mama and my daddy. So I didn't like what was going on, what I was seeing happen. So I just pulled away from it. And so I was doing all of this work, and walked away from it and decided to go back in the woodshed, hone my craft, and then produce this new book.
And that's the reason why I really wanted to kind of use that as a segue to get into the book, because to be quite frank with you, I think in some instances, just based on ideologies and based on previous interviews that I've heard from Cornell and even from Tavis, some of the things that you challenge or you say in this book, and maybe if I'm wrong, correct me, but I think you say some similar things, but you say it in a way that it comes off and it's easier for the audience to receive it. Would you agree with that assessment or?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is that I wanted to write a book that my mother could read. My mom had her first baby she got pregnant in the 9th grade and had her first baby in the 10th grade. So she never finished high school. But she's on chapter 6 right now. So I've done what I set out to do, to write a book that was accessible. And, she tells me all the time, well, as long as you're telling the truth, you just keep telling the truth. And so the book is a reflection of my thinking about contemporary African American politics and contemporary American politics. And it's my own unique language. So in some ways, I like to think of the book as a coming out party, right? That it's not me tethered to Cornell or me bound up with Cornell and Tavis. It's just me thinking out loud with others about this present moment that we're in. So absolutely. So there's going to be some overlap, but it's in my distinct voice,
Right.
I think that's always been the appeal, going back to the State of the Union with the presentations that you would have on that stage. It was very contemporary, and it was relative to myself as being a 20 something at that moment in time. The way that you were able to intersect those ideas of the state of America, the politics with the religion, and just the way that in our communities we relate. And so it was a very understandable language with all of those elements, that for me was empowering to kind of see that and be able to make sense out of all of these theories and thoughts and things that are going on around us.
And I appreciate that. That's high praise, but I appreciate that. Absolutely.
And there were three areas that you kind of touch on, whether it's multiple things you touch on in the book, 3 things we wanted to kind of address. To me, the most interesting being the Black political class, because that's conversation that BG and I kind of have all the time. And so I don't know if we want to start with that one first, or last. But we do want to talk about that, because I know, with BG being from Selma and it being the 51st Voting Rights Act, we have a lot of commentary on that piece, but we also want to touch on the value gap. And then I really, what triggered me to even invite you to be on the show with this blank out campaign, is really relevant in this, current campaign climate. I guess we can start with the value gap and kind of go from there, but I definitely want to leave some time for us to get into this, Black political class. And
the book is divided into 2 parts, right? And the first part is really trying to understand, the context, in which race works in our current moment. And, part of what motivated me to write it was everybody was talking about all of this recovery, right? That we had turned the corner. And when I was looking around my communities, right, looking into my family, I saw people still struggling. Folks who were still struggling in terms of finding jobs, people who had lost their homes, who had entered into the brutal rental market, and many of them struggling, many of them falling into poverty, right? And, you look at the data, 38% of black children are in poverty. In Mississippi, my home state, 50% of black children are in poverty, right? And then you say, well, what are people talking about recovery? Well, it has something to do with the fact that, we're disposable, we're invisible, that folk don't really care. And why don't they care? I kept asking myself these questions, and I said, well, there's something fundamental to this, right? We talk about the achievement gap and the wealth gap and the empathy gap and all of that. But underneath it all is something much more fundamental, and that's the value gap. Mm-hmm. And the value gap is the fundamental belief that white people are valued more than others. And that's just at a nutshell, right? And that belief informs our social arrangements. It informs our political lives. It informs our economic practices. Whether in the context of slavery and people giving voice to notions of freedom, liberty, and equality, they reconcile those notions, those ideas with the belief that white people matter more than others. Value gap. In the context of the Civil War and Reconstruction is supposed to be this effort at a multiracial democracy. What happens? Convict leasing, right? Doesn't end till the 1940s. Jim Crow emerges. That's a reassertion of the value gap. Civil rights movement, Black Power. What happens? Call for law and order, right? Tax revolt. That's the value gap. Elect Barack Obama, right? What happened? Vitriol of the Tea Party. Reassertion of the value gap. Trump, value gap. So part of what I've been saying is that black people aren't saying, or people aren't saying that nothing hasn't changed, because obviously 2016 isn't the same as 1960, isn't the same as 1860. But what they're saying is that the value gap still obtains. Mm-hmm. That white people are still valued more in this country than others. And that value is not just simply expressed by way of races, right? It's in the built environment. Just like I knew I was moving from the black side of town to the white side of town when I was 8 years old. Because we knew in my old neighborhood that when it rained, the streets flooded because the pipes were bad. Well, we didn't have sidewalks. Mm-hmm. We didn't have sidewalks. The baseball diamond wasn't cut. The houses were smaller. The schools were bad, weren't as good. So in other words, in the very places in which I was growing up, I had already come to know that something was up, that some people were valued more than others. But go ahead, Doc.
And I agree 100% with what you're saying. But we have this debate around racism versus classism and which one is, in my opinion, which one we should tackle as black folks. And I tend to believe that rather than, even though I believe racism is an ideology and something that may be hard to address, whereas with classism, that's something that can be addressed within black folk. Is there such thing as a value gap within our own race?
Oh, no. I think, I wouldn't call it a value gap. But I would say that there are certain kinds of commitments that lead certain people to be invested in certain groups as opposed to others. Right. Just as, how can I put this? Just as rich white folk don't want to get close to the hood, some rich black folk don't want to get close to the hood either. Mm-hmm. There's some folk who are just as skeptical of people who are living in hyper concentrated areas of poverty. There's a reason why I don't drive down Stuyvesant Avenue in Trenton, right, at 10 o'clock at night, mm-hmm. right? There's a reason why I don't do it. It's because I got sense. Yeah. You just don't do it, right? But it's also because of a certain set of assumptions about what's going on in Stuyvesant, whether it's happening there or not, mm-hmm. right? And so those assumptions, those stereotypes, I always say to people, you don't need white people for white supremacy to be working.
Right.
They're not necessary to it. I mean, it's in us. And just as the classism is as well, right? So, you got some bourgeois black folk who are invested in their status as bourgeois. Mm-hmm. And we need to be mindful of that, right? Just because you're black doesn't mean we all hold the same views or the same positions or have the same ethics.
How do we address the value gap then?
Well, in the book, I call for a revolution of value. We got to close the value gap by uprooting the racial habits that sustain it.
Right.
And we got to do that by changing the institutions, right? So that means we got to change our view of black people. We're not lazy. We're not looking for a handout. We got to change our orientation to the ballot box. We got to challenge this stuff in the courtrooms. We got to make folk uncomfortable. And so the revolution of value involves changing our view of government. And we change our view of government by changing our demand of government. See, that's what scares people about Bernie Sanders.
Right.
Right. I'm not a Bernie Sanders supporter, but what scares people about Bernie Sanders is that he's demanding that we change our demands of government.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And by changing what we ask and expect of government, right, that means the status quo can't hold its position. So what does it mean for the society to say that college, it will never be free? That public institutions will never, you will never have free tuition? That what does it mean for a society to say that everyone shouldn't be guaranteed health care? Right? We won't even allow ourselves to imagine it. So part of what I'm suggesting is, and particularly in this election cycle, that the election isn't about the how, right? The election is really about breaking the back, right, of a certain way of thinking about government. So we keep asking Bernie Sanders, how you gonna do this? How you gonna do that? Well, I know for damn sure that Bernie Sanders as president couldn't do it all. But the fact that he posits it changes the very frame of how we imagine, right, ourselves in this country and what we take as valuable. This is my critique of Barack Obama. We put all this hope in him, right? We put all this hope in him that finally we had turned the corner because we elected him. But then they elect the Republicans, they take over Congress. All this stuff is coming at him. They disrespecting him. All this stuff and my thinking is go big, change the frame, just change the frame, get us to think differently, not to play the game as it's played, but to try to figure out a new set of rules. So the imagination is key. And, there's this line I tell my students all the time, Doc. I quote Ralph Waldo Emerson. Emerson says that God speaks to us through our imaginations. And I tell my students this, and I said, now, if that's true, then what is the devil doing?
Right.
So the devil's trying to arrest our imaginations to keep us from seeing that the world can be otherwise.
Right.
So that's how I respond to that. That makes sense?
Yeah, a lot of sense, for sure.
It did. And, I think that's actually a good segue because we did want to touch on the blank out campaign. And I want to leave the black political class because I'm very interested in that piece. But, the blank out campaign is something I heard you talk about on the Tom Joyner Morning Show. And that's what triggered me to reach out to you. Can you explain the blank out campaign,
Sure.
and how that would be relevant, especially around the value gap as well?
Part of what the value gap has done is it has distorted how black people participate in the political process. So every 2 to 8 years, Democrats come into our community and they try to herd us to the polls like cattle chewing cud. And then they feel no obligation to deliver actual policy once we elect them into office because they believe that we have nowhere else to go. Right. So in political science literature, they call us a captured electorate. Right. So we're caught. So we can't go over to the Republicans because we know what that is.
Right.
The Democrats can take us for granted. Right. And the only thing they need to do is to turn us out every election. And then they can then bank to the middle, bank to the right. They can then turn rightward, center right. Right. And then you got a black political class. And I know we're going to get into this. You got a black political class that makes its living off of delivering us for the Democratic Party.
Right.
So they deliver us. And then then they go behind closed doors and then broker over crumbs, right? Not actual policy, right? So the blank out campaign is this. Democrats, if you want us to turn out, then you need to put forward a genuine policy initiative and positions that will address the conditions of black folk along 3 areas. 1, education, public education. Mm-hmm. 2, jobs. And 3, criminal justice. And I'm not talking about more community policing and training. And I'm talking decriminalizing misdemeanor charges, talking about changing the ways in which bails are exacted, in which people are having to do time if they can't pay bail. I'm talking about actual concrete policies that will affect the life circumstances of black people. If you can't put that on the table for real in its details, then I'm urging black people across the country to turn out in massive numbers, vote down ballot. That is to say, we come out and we affect and impact the elections around our mayors, our city council persons, our school boards, our county supervisors, state legislatures, the gubernatorial seat. We turn out numbers and affect those elections down ballot, but we leave the presidential ballot blank. And now for some, that's dangerous, because that means in effect that we're going to turn the election over to Ted Cruz or Donald Trump. And be very clear, Ted Cruz is more dangerous than Donald Trump.
I agree 100% with that.
But what I'm saying, Doc, Jeremy, is this. That wouldn't be our choice. It would actually have been the Democratic Party's choice. Right. I'm tired of voting from a place of fear. That's the first thing. And then the second thing, why do we as black voters have to bear the burden of holding off the fascism of the Republican Party? These white folks, these white Democrats got to step up. They got to step up. And the way they're going to have to step up, because we got the leverage in this election. They cannot win without black voters and black and brown voters turning out in massive numbers. They can't win. And so we need to take advantage of that leverage by getting them to commit on the front end, right, to policies that will actually address our conditions. And then this is the collateral thing. Over the last 8 years, for a variety of reasons, we haven't been able to speak to the suffering of black communities. But now we can open up space, right? We're not trying to protect Obama's back. We're not worried about getting access to the White House, but we can now open up space so we can talk about the suffering in our community. Because at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. That's the most important thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And Doc, and that raises something though, because one of the things that we are also seeing is kind of this separation in, I guess, political ideas within the black community, just based off of kind of age and generational gap. So you've got, the older, the baby boomer, I guess, section of the community that is, no matter what, we're Democrat. And some of that is kind of some of that permeation of the white supremacy past.
Right.
The thought that the Democratic Party during I guess maybe more towards the 70s and 80s was more of a liberal party that was more in support of the African American community. And then now you've got like our age and younger who are really seeing that when you get down to it, there's not a whole lot of difference between Republican and Democrat. But when we have to go to the polls collectively as a community, we can't even get on the same accord. So what is your take on just that concept?
Right. The thing is, Doc, is that, our community is complex. And oftentimes what white supremacy has done and what the value gap has done is has distorted our ability to see that complexity. Mm-hmm. Right. We want to think that politics is kind of the simple thing, right? Black folk, because we're black, we have the same interests. And by virtue of that fact, we should be voting in a way that reflects that interest, right? But we got some black folk who are actually invested in the corporate power. Mm-hmm. We got some black folk who are actually committed to the status quo, mm-hmm. right? They are, when we talk about black leaders over and against the Democratic establishment, to be honest with you, many of these black politicians are the Democratic establishment. Mm-hmm. There's no distinction. They're the same. Mm-hmm. And so part of what we have to do is start having an argument, right? Engaging in that back and forth of black politics, right? So there's an argument that we just saw coming out of Super Tuesday in the South. And now as we move to the Rust Belt cities, the Rust Belt states, with just what happened in Detroit. And everybody's talking about black folk in the South love Hillary Clinton, Mm-hmm. When you drill down into the numbers, you see that we're not turning out in massive numbers. Mm-hmm. You see the generational divide that you talked about in South Carolina. 43% of black voters voted for Bernie Sanders. Young black millennials voted for Bernie Sanders. Mm-hmm. So what we see is a much more complex picture of black voting behavior, right? And so part of what has to happen is we have to break through the kind of standard assumptions that how can I put this, Doc? That black voters are the unthinking creatures of American politics. Mm. And we have to just start engaging in that debate, saying exactly what you said, right? And then holding people like Representative Clyburn and Representative John Lewis and even my grandmama, right? My dear, why would you vote for Clinton? You see, I called her Madia.
Yeah,
Right.
start off with that. You got to start off respectfully.
Yeah, but then why would you vote for her? Right? What is she doing for you? What's the Democratic Party do? And then we have to have that debate, not with the assumption that because we're black, we're all going to vote alike, but because we have a different political vision that we're advocating for. Then we're entering into a much more mature phase of black politics. You see what I mean?
Let me ask you this right here, Doc. Well, and you kind of hit on it, and we talk about the black political class, but when we talk about the endorsements that Senator Clinton has received compared to what millenniums are seeing in say Virginia, that 43% that you mentioned.
South Carolina, right?
Yeah, I mean South Carolina. Do you think that is more or less because the leadership have ties to the results of a Clinton victory, whereas the millennials are coming in more pure, no type of interest involved, just looking at how that's going to benefit the we versus the I mentality.
Well, I don't want to say that millennials are pure. The millennials are complex too. You see what DeRay McKesson is doing down in Baltimore.
True.
Is very different than what Alicia Garza and Opal Tomati and Patrice Cullors are doing out on the West Coast, right? Mm-hmm. And very different than what BYP 100 with Charlene Carruthers is in Chicago, or Umi Selah down in Florida, right? So we got a variety of folk, and we want 1,000 flowers to blossom when it comes to African American politics. But let me say this about the black political class: for the most part, they're corrupt. They've sold their souls for a mess of pottage. And what I mean by that is this, right? For the last 8 years, when we start talking about the state of black America, when we just look at the data, right? Our community is suffering, man. People out here are catching hell. And you would think that people would be screaming from the top of their lungs about what's happening in our communities. Our institutions are collapsing. Right? The job market is contracted. We lost 240,000 homes, right? With the housing bubble, collapsing, right? Or crashing or popping. 38% of our children are in poverty. And then we're burying our children day in and day out because they're being murdered by the police, right? And we see it day in and day out. It's gone viral, right? And so you say, what's been going on? Well, my colleague at University of Penn said the new crack is access, right? All these cats have been addicted to that access pipe, right? And didn't want to lose it by engaging in this critical account of what's been happening, right? And this has nothing to do with my position vis-a-vis Obama, right? This has nothing to do with my position vis-a-vis Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders. This has everything to do with the most vulnerable in the community I care most about, period, right? And so what you see, right? All of these black leaders carrying the water of the Democratic Party. All of these black leaders carrying the water, right, of the White House. And you say, well, who is actually advocating? Who's advocating, right, for the most vulnerable among us? And if it wasn't for those young folk getting in the street and challenging, right, the police after they killed Mike Brown, or organizing around the murder of Trayvon Martin, or organizing around the murder of Rakisha Boyd and Sandra Bland and Ayanna. I mean, we can go on and on and on and on and on. If it wasn't for them getting in the street, we wouldn't have seen any change. Mm-hmm. And guess what? They got rid of the sheriff in Ferguson, Missouri without casting one ballot. They didn't go in and vote for the mayor because what they want us to think is that politics is just elections. And see, democratic politics, election is actually the last thing you do. It's not the only thing you do. It's the last. Politics happens well beyond the election cycle. And what Black Lives Matter is suggesting to us, what the Forward Together movement has done in North Carolina, they've been at the epicenter of what the Koch brothers have been doing with Reverend Barber, right? What BYP was been doing in terms of the violence in Chicago and what they had to do with Rahm Emanuel. They've been challenging our very conception of politics, right? Mm-hmm. And when you do that, you challenging the paper of the black middle class. I mean, of the black political class. You challenging how they make their money. Mm-hmm. And when you start challenging how they make their money, they try to set out to crush you.
And so that's why you don't get much consensus from those historical figures for the Black Lives Matter movement and all of those that are coming from the younger generation.
Because if their job is to deliver us.
Yeah.
You see, so this is what the Blank Out campaign does. Two things. One, it disrupts the assumption of the Democratic Party. That's all you got to do is just tell black folk, go out and do the nay-nay, and then we're going to come out and vote for them. Right? It disrupts that. And then the second thing it does, it disrupts the ability of the black political class because they get all their juice from delivering us. So we don't show up. What they got?
When you speak out like this, because I agree with everything you're saying, what type of backlash are you getting from
the backlash?
Yeah, what is the backlash? Because I mean, everything you saying in my eyes and from what I've seen and experienced and just being tuned in and quote unquote staying awoke. What's the backlash? What are you getting from black political leaders?
Well, I had a chance to talk with Mark Morial. He pushed back.
I saw that on MSNBC Morning Joe, I believe.
Yeah, he pushed back real hard. Reverend Al and I are pretty good friends. I just tell him the truth. This is the situation. And Reverend Al will say, we all have different lanes. You do what you do. I do what I do. And I was like, all right, but I'm going to hold you accountable. Right. Some people say I'm just an armchair theorist. I don't really know what politics are actually all about, that I can say all of this from the comfort of my Ivy League chair. I got tenure, that I'm not risking anything, that black folk not showing up to vote for the president. But because I keep telling people I want us to show up in massive numbers to vote down ballot. They say that, I can say that because I'm comfortable. Walking around in my Hickey Freeman suits and driving my BMW, like you ain't suffering, brother. So, you just kind of say in those moments, right, that there are, people, folk coming from my family will say there are principalities and powers, right? And part of that work, man, is to keep us from seeing the otherwise. There's so many people out here, they're black, they're within our community that want us to believe that our only options are those options right in front of us. And my work, my job, right, is to bust through that. It's like, it's like one of the 24 crossbuck, 2 back to the 4 hole, right? I'm going to hit it and hit it hard. You know what I mean? Yeah, I told you I was country, Doc.
You are. That's literally right there. You heard him call that play.
Run that wing team.
That crossbuck.
You just hit the hole, right? And you just got to bust through that, right? So, I catch hell out here. But, part of what, I stand on is what my mother told me. My mama told me, right? As long as you're telling the truth, as long as you're speaking your truth, and you're not speaking it out of any effort to advance your own career, but you're speaking it because you're speaking on behalf and for the most vulnerable and the least of these, then stand on it and take what you will, right? You just, so you just got to speak it. And I learned that from the 4th grade on.
And I know we got to finish up soon, but
sure, Doc.
You're a minority with those opinions. So even with them being a minority, I mean, I'm really just trying to dig more into this backlash because, I mean, it takes a lot to stand firm on your beliefs and even to encourage folks to go in and do a blank out. Cause, I'm considering it. And the reason I'm considering it is because of exactly being introduced to it from the conversations we've had today. And even from, like I said, the Tom Joyner morning show. And I do think that, that's a powerful stance to take. But again, when I get in that moment, am I going to be willing to,
like, wow, do I want to do this?
Yeah. Do I really want to do this? And so,
well, you know what it is, what it is, Doc Jeremy, man, I've been talking with organizers around the country. My hero is Miss Ella Baker. And Miss Baker was so important to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee as they were organizing among sharecroppers in my home state of Mississippi. She would say, shut up and sit down and listen. You might learn something. And what she was saying is that we need to expand the demos, expand who's relevant, who's visible, who has a voice. And so these sharecroppers, folks who didn't think were worth anything but their labor, right, were challenging the very ways in which they imagine, the way in which we imagine democracy. I mean, that's what Miss Fannie Lou Hamer, that's who she was, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. She was a sharecropper who her experiences, nothing in her experiences told her that she could do what she did. Nothing, but she did. Anyway, so part of what I've been thinking is what happens if grassroots organizers around the country say to Bernie Sanders or say to Hillary Clinton, this is what you got to come to the table with. And if you don't, we're going to show up in massive numbers and leave it blank. Right? And then organize in their locales from California to New York to Florida to Chicago to Dallas, Texas, right? To Mobile, Alabama. Organizers who've already been engaged in the politics on the ground, organizing around the vote in this way. Remember, I said we got to get in the streets and we got to change our orientation to the ballot box. We got to change our orientation to the ballot box. And the only thing I can say is this. We are the leaders we've been looking for. Freedom is a practice. It's not an end. Freedom is a practice. It's not an achievement.
Have you spoken
so if we're going to be free, we just need to act like we're free.
Have you spoken to any of these leaders, the D-Rays and the Netters, and tried to have this same conversation with them? And
yeah, you know, I get different reactions. Different reactions from Charlene, you know, in BYP. I sent the book, 10 books to them. I sent, you know, different reactions from Umi, Selah, and the Dream Defenders, right? But the main thing I do know is this, is that, you know, we ain't hit the New York Times or anything like that because that's not the objective. What we do know is that folk are reading it and asking the question.
Right.
And to the extent that they're asking the question, I've done my job.
There you go. BG, what you got?
Well, I was just going to say that the other part about that Doc keeps pointing out is the down ballot thing. And that's one of the things that is most important and really revolutionizing the way that we approach this whole voting thing, because as we saw with President Obama, we voted him in and then we kind of just let up expecting that to be it. But then we forgot to go back and vote for our Congress. Right. And that ultimately is the group of people that help him get his job done. But then if you get even closer, it's like these local elections that a lot of people sleep on. And that affects who handles the money, who's the mayor, who's the police chief, and all that type of stuff. So we do need to do something to emphasize to our community that our attention needs to be shifted a little bit, not putting so much weight only on the presidential election, but also focusing on those elections that are close to home that will affect you immediately.
Immediately, Doc.
So,
man,
you hit that one right on the head, bro.
Man, this has been an amazing conversation. I know we got to get up out of here, but Doc, we still we're going to make a trip up to Princeton, and hopefully we can even revisit this topic again, because I think you really hit on something and touched on something that can be revolutionary. If we can get the word out and really let people hear what you're saying and the approach and plan that you've kind of put into place.
Well, let's make it happen, and I'm going to show y'all I can cook just like my mom.
All right. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about.
Can you just let people know how they can go out and get the book? Because I actually have a copy en route, ordered on Amazon. I hadn't gotten it yet, but
so I would urge everyone to go to Amazon.com or BarnesandNobles.com. If you can't, I would say go there, but first go to your local black bookstore.
Yeah.
And try to find it. And if they don't have it, ask them to order it for you and buy the book from your local black bookstore. So let's support them. But if they don't have it and they don't seem like they want to get it for you, just go to Amazon.com or BarnesandNobles.com. And also, give everybody a shout out. Once you read it, reach out to me on Twitter at @Glaude. And I would love to have a conversation with folk on Twitter about what they think about the book. That would be wonderful.
Nice. BG.
Yes, sir.
Close us out.
We are the Free Lunch Podcast, member of the New South Movement Podcast Network. You can also catch us on Instagram, Free Lunch Podcast, Twitter, Free Lunch Pod C, YouTube, Free Lunch TV. We appreciate Professor Eddie Glaude for stopping by and rapping with us. We got to keep this conversation. An hour just ain't long enough.
It ain't. BG, we really needed this conversation last weekend at the and
Jubilee going into the 51st anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery March, Bloody Sunday to be more exact.
Yeah. So, Professor, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Appreciate y'all. Keep doing this liberation work. Keep doing this freedom work, y'all.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Take care of yourself. Have a good day.
Take care. Peace.
All right.